you up here? Yeah. Good. Yeah, he was the biggest. You're good to watch. It's okay. And he's standing. That's all right. Well, it's probably why, well, she came back. Way to go, Mom. So, here's something you're going to face in your future. And everyone in the congregation knows about it. It's called the SATs. Have you ever heard of them? Can I hear a general groan from the crowd? And the SATs, they measure how well you know you're able to speak, do language, and how well you're able to do math. And so I have here the first part of the list, 300 most difficult SAT words. How many of you know the meaning of these words? Abject, aberration, got that one? Abjure, abnegation. Yeah, sure. How about abrogate? How about abscond? How about abstruse? Accede, accost, accretion, acumen, adamant, admonish, adumbrate, adverse, advocate, affluent, aggrandize, alacrity, alias, ambivalent, amenable, amorphous, anachronistic. You know, you guys know that one, right? Anathema, that's another favorite. Those are hard words, don't you think? Well, in fact, I would say if you learned one of these each week for the rest of your life, that'd probably be smart. It's this or a math equation, so I go with this if I were you. But what I want to say is sometimes people can use big words and feel like they're really, really important. That we want to adumbrate that certain tendency that you have. And I would never want to aggrandize myself by appearing to be affluent as I admonish you in what you might do, but I am adamant about some of the things you must do. Did you understand what I said? Yeah. And sometimes people that speak so high want to impress you. But sometimes it's important to get it down where everyone understands. Like just saying, God cares about you. And God wants the best for you. So we're hitting that theme again today. So I want you to learn all those great words. You're all going to learn adumbrate, admonish, and all that stuff. But I also want you to know that you can speak clearly to God and clearly to others, and they will know that you care about them. Amen? Amen. Amen. You may now return to your seats or stay where you are, whichever you prefer. Why do I get nervous when they say that? Lou, you were like the kid in class there, weren't you? Yeah, that's great. And Sarah too. Yeah, that's great. Well, as you get from what I've just said, we are now moving into the heart of this letter that is 1 Corinthians. We gave a greeting, then opened with this, addressing this issue. Which one of us is the best leader? Is it Apollos? Was it Peter? Is it himself? Right after that, he addresses this question of faith that has been rising up in their gut. And he thought he needs to get right to that. And in effect, this is what the question was. How can this gospel be really true? Where is the power and the wisdom of Christianity compared to other ways of viewing the world that are all around us? And he writes about that, and he summarizes it this way. He says the answer was and is that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. But there was something about the way they put the question that must have bugged Paul. It was as if they were aristocrats posing this great philosophical query. His concern seems to be that people only think about their system not being intellectually rigorous enough and not being culturally relevant enough when they start to think of themselves as intellectual and cultural giants. This is the theme that we will see over and over again. He wants them to be careful about overstating their claim to wisdom and sophistication. Maybe things have gotten pretty nice for them since Paul was there those years ago. Maybe cash is flowing and their homes, they built additions to their home, and now several of them have become members at the Corinth country club. So they're doing all right. And Paul feels he needs to remind them of their roots. They are folks that he has known well. He knows where they came from. He knows who their parents were. He understands their background. And while a couple of them have set themselves up as armchair philosophers and theologians of tremendous insight, the truth is, well, let him tell you. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning at verse 26. Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one can boast before him. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. And so it was with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. Pray with me. God, as we think about this message, allow our faith too to not rest on human wisdom, but with your power. Let that power speak to our hearts and lives in these few moments. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm calling this message, You Ain't Dutch. And I'll bet you can finish the couplet for me. I'll say the first line. If you ain't Dutch,
you ain't lunch.
You guys don't know that one, huh? Cindy said, I never heard that before. Obviously, they're not from the Midwest, upper regions, right? The phrase is, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. You are just, you didn't know that, did you? And you are Dutch. Yeah, it happens, yeah.
Is that out of the Bible?
That's right. It's right in second hesitations. If you ain't And so, I'll be here all week, folks. Okay. And so Paul is telling the Corinthians then and the Corinthians now, you ain't Dutch. He says, I know you people. As he politely puts it, not many of you were wise by human standards. Let's translate that. Nobody would mistake you for a really smart person. You might be a hard worker. You might be very helpful, but let's face it, you are no genius. And right away, when we hear that, we get our hackles up, don't we? Because, truth be told, we think we're pretty darn amazing. A gentleman named Tom Nichols wrote a book called The Death of Expertise. And he tells this story. A few years ago, a mischievous group of pollsters asked American voters whether they would support bombing the country of Agrabah. As you might expect, Republicans tended to support military action while Democrats were more reluctant. There's only one problem. Agrabah doesn't exist. It's from the animated Disney film Aladdin. Only about half the people surveyed figured this out, and liberals and conservatives gleefully pointed fingers at each other. For experts in foreign affairs, however, there is no way around the alarming reality that so many Americans had a well-defined view on bombing a cartoon. Nichols goes on to say, increasingly lay people don't care about expert views. Instead, many Americans have become insufferable know-it-alls. I'm just quoting him, I'm not saying. Locked in constant conflict with each other while knowing almost nothing about the subject they are debating. How did this happen? How is it that people now not only doubt expert advice, but believe themselves to be as smart or even smarter than experienced professionals? Parents who refuse to vaccinate a child, for example, aren't really questioning their doctors, they're replacing their doctors. They have decided that attending the University of Google, as one anti-vaccine activist puts it, is the same as going to medical school. People who have no idea how much the United States spends on foreign aid think that they're the peers of experienced diplomats. Experts in almost every field can tell similar stories. There's a lot of blame to go around for all of this. The smartphones and tablets that we carry around all day that we think can answer anything are only part of the problem. The American educational system, from grade school to graduate school, encourages students to think of themselves and their views as special. An A is now a common grade. The news media, while trying to tell people what they need to hear, must compete for ears, eyes, and clicks, and so are also forced to ask them what they'd like to hear. And even if we manage to avoid the intellectual saboteurs of the internet, we're still all too likely to get our news and views from social media, where a silly meme from your Aunt Rose in Schenectady competes for your attention with actual information. I realized that piece was a little long, but I kept it all just so we get to Aunt Rose in Schenectady. I thought we needed that. Actually, I'm not sure that there was ever a time or culture when the average person didn't generally think that we secretly are the true experts. We're the smart ones. We have the insight. And so when we bring that we are so right attitude to faith, we once again think we are the experts. And it's particularly ironic in Christianity because Jesus was not only surrounded by experts, but constantly fighting them off. Take this example. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. If you've done a recipe where you had mint in there, you chopped it up, imagine taking that bit and figuring out 1/10 of that and saving that out. That's pretty detailed, wouldn't you say? And they had the details right, but they forgot the bigger picture. And so Paul wants to remind these experts in Corinth that they are, as a little phrase I like says, they're not always the sharpest knives in the drawer. Paul, he's been to seminary, he's been to graduate school, Paul has been all over the known world. He has earned the right to speak into their life. And he has a message for them, and that is this: you ain't Dutch. You don't have status granted to you by your genealogy either. You aren't royalty. And just before you tell me what a hotshot business person you were, he says, I have to tell you, I was there. And you weren't really that big a deal in terms of influence. You didn't have what they call juice with officials and rulers. In fact, he says, that's why God chose you. All this talk about the foolishness of God being wiser than the wisdom of men. He says, you people, you are a living illustration of that principle. So to again paraphrase him, he is saying, isn't it wonderful? God took a bunch of backward rubes and did something with you. He chose those who amounted to nothing and made them something. You were so lame as a group that you have only one boast. Look what God did with what he had. Praise the Lord. You know the Corinthians had to be saying, yeah, I guess you could put it that way. Sometimes we can get a little high on our own story, can't we? I mean, here in today's Corinth, we remember the paper mill. And there were 2,000 or so jobs that were the lifeblood coursing through our community and our economy. We remember when our town was riding high and there was really something going on and Corinth was special. But today's a different day, isn't it? We look at what has happened and we can get discouraged. We can start to falter. We can wonder if we ever were really all that. And the answer is, no, you are what you are, and I am what I am by the grace of God. And His great miracle is not that He is lucky to have us, but that He could create something as beautiful as this fellowship out of the non-experts that He has to work with, namely us. Now, as long as I'm doing couplets, like if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. Let's see if you know this one. What's good for the goose
Is good for the gander.
There we go. Kids, ganders if you know. But anyway, he says it's not just the congregation that has to realize that we might have developed an elevated view of ourselves. It's also the pastor who has to watch him or herself. Paul says there is a reason why he is not emulating the style of the day. That style of speech was called sophistry. Now today, the word sophistry is a purely negative word. To be a sophist is to create fallacious argument meant to deceive people. There's no one like that out there in the public eye, is there? If you made a statement and someone stands up and says, "What is this sophistry?" well, you're in trouble. But in that day, 2,000 years ago, the art of sophistry involved using some of the wonderful flowery oratory from Rome and ancient Greece's famous past. It was a form of saying things very well. And now Paul returns to the way, to why he approaches things a little differently than other speakers. He says that when he arrived, he made a decision. I'll reread that section. "When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you, except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power." Once again, he is emphasizing that decision to not use eloquence and to not use wisdom. And there is, as you may know, there is a theory about this passage. Because if you look in the book of Acts, it sort of covers, not sort of, it definitely does follow Paul's journeys. And it shows him in Acts 18 going to the city of Corinth. But just prior to that, Acts 17, he goes to Athens. And Athens was a very interesting experience. He was in the synagogue, he was in the marketplace, he was doing what he always did. He talked about Jesus and gave the background for why Jesus is the Messiah. And the response of these people in Greece was very interesting. It says, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. But it turns out Paul had some impact because he is invited to the Areopagus, the main place where people have a debate. And once there, the people said, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." Then it says this in parentheses. "All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas." Well, Paul then ties into their culture because they're surrounded by all these hundreds, thousands of idols. So many that there is even one that is marked to an unknown God. And Paul uses that to connect with them. And at some point, he makes this link. He says, this God is no longer unknown. He has come to us as Jesus. And here, let me tell you about it. Well, scholars note there's no church that gets established in Athens. There's no great work that seems to last there. And that's where he was just before he comes to Corinth. Well, no one knows that this is anywhere near right. But it is interesting how carefully Paul says that he is going to shy away from all kinds of cultural ties and references. His preaching, he says, was not given power through wise and persuasive words. His power was through a demonstration of the Spirit's power. It's a reminder to this gander that I need to do the same thing. We all need to keep it real. We all need to remember that we ain't Dutch, although some of you have already told me that you are in fact Dutch, but I think you get the point. As for this demonstration of God's power, if Paul means by that performing miracles, I'm not quite able to pull that off. I'm sorry, I did not see that in the job description. I'll try, but I don't think it's going to happen. But the true demonstration of the Spirit's power, he is saying, is how God has worked in the lives of the people of that church. That's true for the church there, and it's true for the church here. The work of God is not simply to give us an experience of flowery oratory, but to see that He has built up powerful elements in our lives. So I say, ask yourself, what has the Lord built up in you? How has your faith developed to make you a better man or woman than you were? What qualities are shining through you that were less present 10 years ago? Are you quicker to love than you were 10 years ago? Or are you quicker to criticize? Do you find yourself reflecting more joy towards others? Or is it more grumbling that goes toward others? And do you find yourself to be more at peace, even in troubling times? Or are you constantly agitated? Those are the first three fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace. Do you have more of those elements now than you did a while ago? I hope so. I hope the demonstration of the Spirit's power is not in how well we make an argument, but in how Jesus is reflected in our lives. So here we are, the chosen, loved, beautiful children of God, the very bride of Christ. He has given us so much and called us His own. And yet, there is this other side. We are not famous by the world's standards, most of us anyway, if you're famous. I didn't know that. We aren't of noble birth, whatever that is worth. We are just regular folks. And once we forget that, once we think that we are God's gift to others, we then stop being God's gift to others. We stop demonstrating His power in our little lives. You are very special. You are the child of the King. But the opposite is also true. You ain't Dutch. You are just a regular guy or gal. And I am just a regular preacher who needs to remember that focusing on Christ crucified among us is good enough. And I need to acknowledge my weakness and my need for the same Jesus that you need. And together, we regular, chosen people will demonstrate His power through lives that are yielded to Him. Then others will know that God can take regular people, the things that are not, and turn them into something amazing. It may be true that you ain't Dutch, but what is also true is this: you are His. Amen. Would the ushers come forward for the offering?